So hi everybody, today I'm here with Lise, who is a quantitative technologist, and she graduated recently from the University of British Columbia. So I just wanted to sit down with her and learn more about how she got started in this field and how she got to the job where she is today.
Hey, I'm Lise, but yeah, I graduated from UBC last month, moved to Chicago and started working at Radix. My major was computer engineering. I guess kind of lesser known fact is that I actually started out at UBC in engineering physics, and then I ended up making the transfer to computer engineering sometime after second year, like in the middle of third year, basically. So feel free to ask me about that.
So I guess I was just wondering, did you know that you wanted to go into sort of engineering, physics, or computer engineering in high school, or how did you kind of decide that you wanted to major in that in college?
Yeah, so actually further backstory than that, I did not know I wanted to major in engineering at all when I was in high school. I actually started out majoring in literature, and that was at the University of Toronto, and realized throughout the course of that I actually didn't particularly, well, I want to say I didn't picture myself working in literature, but if I'm going to be totally honest, I also couldn't really see that many job prospects other than academia. So I decided somewhere during that process that I actually wanted to do engineering instead. I actually had done a little bit of coding during that time. Like I got into it during that time, and thought it was fun and was like, well, there's apparently a job market for this and I think it's pretty interesting. So let's do that. And so I went into general engineering at Langara College, actually, for my first year. And then
This
applied
was after you already finished your English degree?
I didn't finish my English. I ended up dropping out partway. And decided to, well, because, okay, so I had to, oh man, just making sure I get my story straight. Okay, so I actually didn't study like physics or anything in high school. So I had to backtrack a lot to fill in the prerequisites. And I actually had to do grade 12 physics. It was actually quite easy to do. I just did it online. It took like 2 months. And that allowed me to go to Langara, and I did my first year there, and then I transferred to UBC. And I guess because at the time I transferred, like I mentioned that I thought I would be interested in studying something computer related.
Yeah.
But then like after my first year, I was like, oh, I don't know, like why am I restricting my choices so much? So I decided to go into EngPhys instead because it's kind of the more general of all the engineering programs.
Yeah.
So you end up doing a bit of mechanical, a bit of electrical, and also a little bit of computer. And then you also have, I think, 5 or 6 technical electives that you can use on basically whatever you like.
Right.
So I did that in second year, and realized that after all of that, I was still really interested in computers, and turns out not that interested in mechanical or electrical. So then I ended up talking to some professors in UCE, and it wasn't necessarily my intention to transfer right away, but they said actually it would be really easy to transfer and you can take more CPEN courses. So I did that. So yeah, talk to your professors because, you know, I wouldn't have done that if I hadn't chatted with Satish.
Wow, that's really cool. I find it interesting how some people, they think that when people go into something like computer science or computer engineer, they've been knowing that that's what they wanted to do since they were 12. But it's like you, like even for me, like I didn't know way until I already basically started university. I was like, okay, maybe I do want to be like a programmer and things like that.
Really? Yeah. What did you imagine yourself doing when you were in high school?
I wanted to do something more related to design. And then it wasn't until I kind of like what you said, became more open-minded, like, okay, I shouldn't limit myself. I should try other things, right? And then kind of decide. So during my last internship, I was like, okay, I actually kind of like the more technical aspects of software engineering. So I'm like, you know, I think it's like what you said, just be open-minded and not just like try to restrict yourself from the start.
Yeah, definitely. But I mean, it sounds like I can't really think of a better thing to kind of merge with programming and like software engineering than design. Really, there's just I mean, there's so many roles for it. There's so many cool things that you can do with that, right?
Yeah, for sure. Especially with a lot of user experience and user interface designers now, they're definitely in huge demand too. I guess the next thing I wanted to ask you is then how does a typical day look like for you? What do you do in your role? I think you're the first person that I've talked to as a quantitative person. Is Radix a trading firm, you said?
Yes. So
Okay,
Radix
yeah.
is a proprietary trading firm. So Oh man. So I'm still trying to figure out for myself what all this means, to be honest. So
Right.
just like full disclosure, my background, I actually don't really know anything about finance at all. I didn't know about finance before I interviewed here, really. And it was kind of funny because I remember doing my interviews. I kept asking like over and over again, like, I don't know anything about finance. Is that really okay with you guys? And they're like, yeah, totally. And I was like, no, but really, I don't think you understand how much I don't know about finance. So I guess that's kind of one answer to your question is that, I mean, I am learning very quickly. There's a lot of terminology that I'm completely unfamiliar with. But the gist of my work is just software engineering with like a funny, weird sounding title that most software engineers don't have. I'm not sure why they actually decided to give me the title they did because, as far as I can tell, it's not like a super common title in the industry either. So I guess just kind of consider that I'm a software engineer. I go into the office or Zoom into the office or log into Slack, whatever we do these days. And most of my day is spent um, making software, testing software, figuring out the specifications for software, working with my team to kind of like collaborate and help each other out on whatever projects we're working on and figure out what should be prioritized, stuff like that. And in terms of the projects that I actually do, so actually quite a lot of technology, as you might imagine, is actually involved in finance and in trading. Um, like in the past, you would have had somebody on a trading floor saying like, I want to buy, I don't know, 100 shares of this or something like that. But
Yeah.
for quite a while now, everything is electronic,
Mm.
and performance and speed are really important, and correctness, obviously. So technology is quite highly valued within trading firms and within the financial industry more broadly. So, oh man, I'm trying to think about how I'm trying to like figure out the best way to describe it, I guess. Okay, you know what? Why don't I actually backtrack a little? So the team that I'm on is responsible primarily for connecting to the exchanges. So for us, we're trying to figure out how to interface with all the different exchanges in the world, and there are tons of exchanges. I don't even know how many, like thousands, tens of thousands, and every single one of them has different rules and different protocols. And then different countries also have different laws and different regulations on top of that. So you have to deal with all of that. Um, so that's, I think, probably one of the more boring parts of the job is to just, like deal with all the paperwork and the regulations. And the more interesting parts is the fact that you have to then figure out how to make it perform really, really well. Because in trading, you can imagine if you're trying to like buy a share of something and like 100 other people are also trying to buy a share of the same thing, you need to, it's better if you're the fastest person, right? So like execution speeds, latencies, all of that sort of stuff is really, really important. And that was one of the reasons I chose this job, actually, rather than something where execution speed or something where performance was less critical, because I personally find it really, really cool to like reach down into the guts of like the compiler and the operating system and figure out how to like squeeze out a tiny bit more efficiency. It also matches really well with my background because I majored in computer engineering, not computer science. So I actually do have a little bit more knowledge or interest or understanding of like the performance enhancement aspects. So yeah, I think that's probably a pretty decent high-level description of what I do and why I like it, I guess.
Cool.
But if you zoom out away from all that, it's you know, making software, it's making a tool that does something that somebody wants to do.
Right. So how did you find yourself applying to prop trading firms? Is it something that you wanted to do after you graduate, or did it just kind of come along?
It just came along. So I actually hadn't really considered the field very much at all. Like I knew it existed, but I had kind of I've been imagining myself working in tech. When I graduated, I interned when I was at UBC in my final year before graduating. That is, I interned at Stripe and at Facebook, which are both tech companies, and just kind of assumed that I would be working in tech when I graduated. And so the recruiters at Radix actually reached out to me last year, and when they reached out to me, they, like I didn't know anything about them, and I kind of set up an informational phone call with them and learned about it. And they told me, like they explained about all the performance aspects, and I was like, it's actually pretty interesting to me. So yeah, I guess I'll agree to do a phone interview. And I got through that, and I was like, all right, I guess I'll agree to an on-site. I've never been to Chicago before. And so I went to Chicago, and then they ended up liking me after the interview and made me an offer. And I was like, huh, well, I guess I'll just take the offer because it sounds kind of cool. And but I don't want to be flippant about it. It was a really tough choice because two industries are, I mean, there's some similarities, but there are some real differences between industries as well.
Right. That's cool. Yeah. There's actually a lot of different opportunities, not just in tech, but also like, I think a lot of different industries, they're all hiring people who know these types of skills, like what you said, speed and efficiency, like applies to like so many different fields. They're always looking for people.
Yeah, for sure.
So do you think there are important skills that are like applicable to this role more than other software engineering jobs? Is it more like you have to know low-level programming languages like C++ and things like that? What are some of the main technical skills that you use on a daily basis?
Yeah, that definitely helps a lot, knowing C++. And it's not just at my company, C++ is very widely used in the industry in general, because obviously compared to something like Python or Ruby, you get a lot better performance out of C++. So that's something that I was that's one of the differences I would say between tech and finance, is that in tech, I think you see a lot more of the attitude. It doesn't really matter what language you're using. We should be able to expect anyone to pick up the language. And that's a really cool attitude to have as well. And that's something that I do miss a little bit about tech. The kind of, can do, like everybody, like do it, like I can learn anything type of attitude. Which is not to say that finance people don't have it, but there's definitely a lot more emphasis placed on that you know C++, you get really, really good at this one language. So if you already know C++, that does give you a bit of an advantage when it comes to applying for jobs in the finance industry. But that said, there are also other languages that are used. Like I've seen lots of roles for Python, for C#, surprisingly, at a few companies. And if you have done any research into the industry, then you also know about Jane Street, and they use OCaml. And I guess the point is, if you're really good at a particular language. And by good here, I mean like you really understand the guts of how its interpreter or its compiler works. And so that's what allows you to know how to make the optimizations that are really valuable. You can probably find somebody who will value that skill. So that's one way that you can become valued within the finance world. Another way that you can become really valued is if you have a really strong mathematical background. And actually at my company and a lot of other companies, they really like hiring people with PhDs in quantitative fields like math, stats, theoretical physics, or experimental physics, actually. Probably computer science too, but those are a lot of PhDs that I have seen. And that's just because that's kind of, I guess, the nature of the industry is that you are doing a lot of quantitative analysis and you do need some pretty advanced math knowledge for that. So if you have that as part of your background, you can become a pretty desirable candidate as well, I guess.
Right. And do you mind explaining to some people who might not know why languages like C++ is particularly important for your role?
Sure, yeah. So just mainly because C++ as a language specifically gives you a ton of control over how your program executes. So you know how a computer program executes, you know about like the stack and the heap and memory allocation. Most languages abstract that for you. So a language like Java or Python or Ruby or most languages that you see used in tech. So when I say tech, I'm going to qualify that as like mostly web-based technologies. So the languages that are used in the tech world are usually not going to reveal things like pointers and memory allocation to you. They kind of handle that for you. And there are huge downsides to that. If you ever end up working in, let's say, Java in a place where performance is important, and you get, you may have heard the term garbage collection cycle or something like that. Yeah. Yeah. So that's one way in which they help you, but then they also hurt you, because by taking away the control of when you can create and destroy objects, they make it so that you might get stuck creating and destroying objects at a time you don't want to be doing that. So C++ basically saves you from doing that. And in exchange, you get to deal with all sorts of fun things like memory, like your own memory management. And you can shoot yourself in the foot pretty badly if you don't do it well, because you can have, you know, dangling pointers or no pointers and seg faults, which you never see with Python. At least I've never seen Python.
We love seeing those errors.
Yeah, think about this. I'm wondering if you could trigger it. I mean, Python runs on C. A lot of Python, or most Python runs on C, I think. So maybe you could, if you tried hard enough, manage to make it difficult. But anyway, yeah, so the point is, really powerful language, lots of tools. You can make your program really, really optimized and run super fast. But the trade-off is that you can also create a lot of mistakes. And there's like a lot to learn. I'm not an expert in C++ at all. And I think the joke that I've generally heard is that Bjorn Stroustrup, who's the creator of C++, is probably only a 7 out of 10 in terms of expertise in C++, because that's how complicated the language is. I think that's a bit of an exaggeration, but it kind of gets the point across. It's a complicated language with a lot of features, and you can screw up pretty badly.
Yeah. Well, the story pointers are important, and memory management is.
Yeah. Thank you for the summary. That was really long-winded. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember doing my operating systems class, and I would just get so many of those errors. I'm like, ah, yeah, learning it at first is really tough for somebody who's never heard about pointers and stuff before. It took me a while to get my head around it, but as you said, it's quite important though for certain things.
If you want the best memory, if you want the best performance, you definitely do need to deal with stuff like that. So if you enjoyed your operating systems class, then you might enjoy working in finance.
And what are some of the challenges of the role?
Oh man.
Besides memory management.
Definitely memory management. Challenges. Technical challenge is probably the biggest one. That's something I was really looking for, actually. So I'm pretty happy that that is a pretty big component of my work. Other challenges. I don't know. Dealing with I alluded to this earlier, but there are so many different exchanges, so many different countries, and I mean this is kind of just like funny anecdote, I guess, but connecting to exchanges in other countries that are not English, and sometimes their documentation is not the best either, and then you just kind of have to figure it out. I mean, you still have to do the work. So, you know, it doesn't matter if they give you horribly translated documentation that, you know, with typos and words that make no sense, you still have to figure it out. So that's definitely one challenge.
So what are some of the growth opportunities for somebody in your role? Do they end up going into a more senior quantitative role, or is it, what kind of things do they usually stay in the industry, or they go into tech later on? Like,
that's kind of funny because I spent so much time trying to figure this out as well before I accepted the offer. And okay, so I just to be, this is always, I always feel so awkward talking about this, but like it would be kind of a lie not to talk about it. Probably the primary reason that most people go into this industry is for the money. Just, you know, obvious. So that's basically probably your biggest source of growth right there, is that you can grow your compensation to be pretty high. And if you do a good job, then you can be very well rewarded for it. There's also the downside risk, of course, that if you don't do a very good job, there can be a lot of competition in this industry. There are things like management opportunities, but there's not so much like in a company like Google or Facebook or Stripe, for that matter. You have levels that you kind of move up, right? And your salary does grow with those as well. But there's also kind of like the prestige of, you know, like, oh, I just got promoted and now I'm an E5 and not an E4 or something. And I think some companies also like kind of show that on your internal profile, so people know they're talking to an E5 or something like that. So that's something that you don't get. Like everything is fairly, there's no like moving up through the ranks or anything like that, because there's really only one rank. And most of your growth is going to be from just getting bigger bonuses every year, hopefully getting bigger bonuses. The alternative is much worse. And other than that, you can go into management. Another thing you can do is kind of like, if you feel like that you know enough, you can strike out on your own. And there are means to do that. For example, you can set up something called a desk. That's something that a lot of trading firms offer, where you can like sort of join them, but not really. Like you end up joining them, but running your own operation. Like you're almost a contractor, but not really. You're also almost sort of a client, because like they'll give you access to tools and support, and you'll be able to use their servers and stuff like that, but not really. And you're also sort of a competitor, but not really, because you might be trading against other people at the same company. it's kind of complicated, but you can kind of do that, and that ends up almost being like, you can kind of think of it as like being a startup incubator within a finance company. And then one step beyond that, if you really think, all right, I think I've got, you know, some really good ideas here, and I've got the technical chops and the mathematical know-how, you can just start your own trading firm. I say like, oh, you just start your own trading firm. I have no idea what that entails. It's probably really complicated and stuff, but I don't know. After a few years, you know, that is an option for you if you want to kind of grow in the way where you take more responsibility for your work and also more risk, because I guess because it is finance, it really follows the rule that with greater risk comes potentially greater reward. So I would say that's probably the primary way in which you grow. Aside from that, you can move into other industries as well. I don't know if those would necessarily be growth, but I know some of my I can't really call them past coworkers, I guess, because they weren't at the company at the same time as me, but like former employees of my current company have gone to places like Google, for example. So that is an option. The skills are very transferable because Google really also really likes it if you know C++ very well. They do have a lot of stuff that runs on C++. So yeah, there are definitely options, but growth is pretty much just you make more money. It's kind of straightforward.
And how many people are at your firm typically? I don't think it's as large as Google or anything, so
definitely not. No. That's another, I would say, that's another part of this industry. Why I ended up going with finance is because firms end up staying pretty small. I think the biggest that I know of would be probably somewhere in the 4,000 or 5,000 range. And that's still tiny compared to Google. Google is what, like 100,000 or something. Yeah. So my company is between 60 and 70 right now. So that's the size I really like. Yeah, I probably should have mentioned that earlier. That was a really big reason I ended up choosing to go into finance instead of tech, because I like knowing pretty much everyone I work with. It's really nice.
It's nice, yeah. I think one summer I talked to a Microsoft intern, and then she told me just in her intern class, there was like 1,500 interns or something that summer. And I'm like, that is just crazy.
Oh.
Yeah, that's like basically you put the interns together, it's like their own little company. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, it's just personal preference, right?
Yeah.
Like, I really like being able to recognize people that I pass by in the hallway.
That's good. And I guess the last question I have for you is for anybody who's wanting to go into, say, quantitative technology or just working at a prop trading firm, are there any advice that you have for college students?
Honestly, okay, I don't know if I'm the best source of advice for those questions specifically, because I had no idea I was even going to end up here until I randomly received an email, which is probably just really mostly blind luck. But let's see. I actually did spend some time asking them why they reached out to me. So maybe I can share some of that, I guess. So I did make sure when I was in school to keep my GPA quite high. And that is something, if you are interested in working in finance, it is an industry that does care about that. So by contrast, tech doesn't usually, as far as I know, care that much about GPA, but finance does. And another thing is they care, like I mentioned, about C++. So if you have any background in that, even if you've just like done a few projects or something. I think the thing that caught their eye when looking at my profile was that I actually took a course in second year when I was in engineering physics, where we built a robot and wrote all of the firmware in C++. And they saw that and they were like, okay, so this person at least knows some C++.
Yeah.
So that was a draw for them. And beyond that, if you're really good at math, particularly at the level where you can be competing in ACM or Olympiads or stuff like that, that is definitely something that will catch recruiters' eyes. And but that's like I realize this sounds like oh yeah, all you have to do is like compete in math Olympiads, know C++, and like have a GPA of 90 something percent. But you can also, I mean, like probably my biggest piece of more general advice is just like reach out to people. So many of my opportunities that I've gotten, 3 out of the 4 internships that I had from actually just flat out asking people for referrals. Sometimes people I like barely even knew I asked for referrals. Obviously, don't be creepy or weird about it or anything, but like most people are really happy to kind of help out and tell you what you need to do and give you a referral if they think that you'd be suitable for the job. And I think a lot of people are just kind of too scared to, a lot of students are like too scared to actually go reach out for these things. But that's, and in the worst case, even if they're like, no, I don't think you're qualified for this right now, they can still give you a lot of really good information. Like, for example, they can tell you how to become qualified.
Yeah.
So that's probably my biggest piece of advice.
Yeah, that's good advice. I think a lot of students actually don't even know that there are referrals, and even some interns and stuff, they're able to give them out. So I guess if you are looking to get your first internship or something, I think connecting with upper year computer science, or like even people in your program who had previous internships at companies that you worked at, like they probably do have referral links, like some of them do. And
even if they actually can't give you a referral, another thing, I don't know, pro tips or something. Another thing they can do is just kind of give you the recruiter's email address.
That's true, yeah.
You can do as well. You can just email recruiters. It's kind of their whole job. And I know it sounds like super scary and rude to just randomly email someone out of the blue, but a lot of the times they're quite happy to, have you come to them instead of them have to go finding you. Because I mean, if you end up applying through a website, especially for a big company like Facebook, it's just kind of a black hole. They don't see your resume a lot of the time. So you do kind of have to throw yourself into their faces a little.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for taking time to share your experiences and advice. This was really inspiring. I think that it was also really interesting how you were talking about how you even got to talk trading firm and software engineering. So yeah, just thank you so much.